So before we begin, I just want to quickly cover a little bit about Riverwoods. Riverwoods has been a leader in redefining retirement communities for over 25 years. What you're looking at here is Riverwoods has 3 campuses in Southeast New Hampshire. We have our flagship campus in Riverwoods Exeter, and we have our community in Riverwoods Manchester, and then we have the newest community is Riverwoods Durham that opened 2.5 years ago. So Riverwoods is the most trusted community in senior living in New England, and it allows independent adults to have purpose, to really find community here, and to have wonderful activities and excellent healthcare if and when they should need it. So on the next slide, I'm just going to touch upon what a continuing care retirement community is. For those of you who may not be familiar with what the acronym is, CCRC. Jeff, if you just want to go to the next slide. So CCRC is a continuing care retirement community. It is an insurance product. So each CCRC is regulated by the state that it is operating in. So all 3 of our communities were regulated by the New Hampshire Department of Insurance. That means we do annually submit our financial performance to the state. And residents who come into a continuing care retirement community, they are prepaying and insuring for what their potential healthcare needs may be in the future. So they're prepaying for assisted living, memory support, or nursing care. And a portion of your entrance fee, which is the fee you would pay when you join the community, and a portion of your monthly service fee, they are both tax deductible. And so Riverwoods is also a lifestyle choice. It's a smart decision to make, to know that all your health care will be provided for you, but it's also a wonderful lifestyle choice. So you move in while you're independent, and by coming into the community, you are then free from home maintenance, free from your chores. We have housekeeping here, wonderful dining options here, courtesy transportation, and we have a large array of activities, programs, educational events. And what we all know the last 2 years have shown us is really the importance of socialization. So being part of a community really provides many options to have socialization, to join a number of committees there. And then most important, you're staying in control of your life. So now I want to turn it over to our presenter. I want to tell you a little bit about Jeff today. So Jeff Feingold, he is the editor of New Hampshire Business Review. He's been a journalist for over 40 years. In that time, he's worked as a reporter and editor of the weekly and daily newspapers in New Jersey and New Hampshire. He's also worked as a freelance writer for state, regional, and national publications, including the New York Times and The Nation. He's been a longtime guest on public affairs shows on radio and TV, and he's the host of New Hampshire Business Review's weekly Down to Business podcast. So now I will turn it over to Jeff for this presentation.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me to do this. I know that I appreciate everyone at Riverwoods for inviting me and having my faith and confidence in my ability to tell you about the economy. But things have been pretty rough the last few years. I've been doing this a long time, and since 2019, at the start of COVID, it's become extremely difficult to talk about the economy confidently over how it's going to be performing even a couple of months from now because of, as we've learned from the Omicron variant and Delta variants, that when you think you're safe, you're not anymore. So that's a major concern still. But I just want to start first by talking about what I will be talking about mostly in the next hour or whatever it is. There are several issues that are affecting the economy of New Hampshire, United States, the whole world. And obviously, number one at the top of that list is inflation, which is related in so many ways to other things that are going on, including what's the horrible events in Ukraine that are just, they're just horrible. They're heart-wrenching, but they're also having a serious effect on the economy, not just on energy, but also on food around the world. And that's just fueling more inflation or potential for more inflation. And that is really a concern, obviously. I know a lot of economists had thought late last year and early this year, as things started heating up, then inflation started, just getting a little bit more concerning, that it would be done by late this year. But I don't think anyone thinks that right now, especially because of the energy situation, but also because of the supply chain, which is still not settled. And actually, because of what's going on in Europe, it could be much worse going forward, which is a concern for New Hampshire and everyone else in the United States and certainly around the world, because as it's more difficult for companies to obtain their supplies, prices will be going up from that too. So we're really in wouldn't say we're in uncharted territory, but we're in a kind of territory that's very concerning. I'm going to try to put a nice face on it. The other two issues are things that I do believe are affecting everyone in the United States, companies in the United States, but in particular, these are issues that are affecting New Hampshire. Two of them are workforce shortage. The Great Resignation. We have a serious workforce labor shortage in New Hampshire that's only been getting worse. I'm sure the people at Riverwoods could tell you about it. The healthcare industry has been really struggling, and related industries have been really struggling to find people to work. And the other one is housing. New Hampshire has and this is true around the country, but New Hampshire in particular has a very serious housing shortage, both single family and multifamily. And we'll get into that in just a little while. Okay, so anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about the New Hampshire workforce. Right now, we have a 2.6% unemployment rate. It might be a little bit high. It might have gone up a little bit under Omicron, but it's still a very, very, very low unemployment rate, one of the lowest in the country. And we have had a record number of job openings going forward. The economy of New Hampshire in April of 2019, we had a unemployment rate of around 16%. This went up from 2%, around 2 to 3% in March to 16% in 1 month. That's how devastating COVID was. Shut so much of our economy down, like as elsewhere. But since then, it's really bounced back. As you can see from this chart, you can see the depths of the job openings. It was it actually reached its real depth in July 2019, because there was the governor didn't want to call it, but there was a lockdown, and many much of the hospitality and tourism industry was just shut down, as well as other non-essential businesses. But it's obviously bounced back very well. You could see where it dips there. Those correlate to some of the variants, the rises in COVID. But as we've emerged from COVID again, you've seen how it's just going up and up. And the problem is that labor participation. We have a very serious issue where there's people who just have left the workforce. Here again, as you can see, we had a lot of people on unemployment during COVID. In fact, according to Brian Gottlieb, who's the economist for the state, he's the director of the State Employment and Labor Market Information Bureau, which keeps track of all kinds of information on the economy. The New Hampshire paid out more in unemployment benefits during the pandemic than the total paid in the previous 15 years combined. The total was $2 billion during the pandemic, as opposed to 1.9 billion in the 15 previous years. That's how much unemployment there was in New Hampshire. A lot of it was because of special federal government programs that provided unemployment for people who maybe had to stay home to care for someone with COVID, or had to stay at home with a child or another person of another dependent who didn't have the daycare that was, or the school that was needed. So they were covered by unemployment. But it still gives you an idea of how much of what a devastating effect it had on the economy, because those people who were getting the unemployment in normal times, when schools were open, when daycares were open, would have been in the workforce, and they've just been left. And actually many of them, as we can see, have not come back. We've seen this quit rate here. New Hampshire is not quite as bad as the US, but it's still at one point was pretty bad, but that was before the pandemic. It's still been higher than, let's say, neighboring Massachusetts. And these are people who just leave after, they just leave their jobs, and it's not clear whether they go back and get other jobs or they just leave the workforce. But it seems by the numbers where we've been looking at that we have seen that people are just not coming back into the workforce. And as you can see, if participation rates had remained the same, labor force participation rates have remained the same as they were in 2019 as they are today. If today's labor force participation rate was the same as it was in 2019, there would be 22,000 more people in the New Hampshire workforce, which is just a mind-boggling number. We're a small state, and this is absolutely what has been affecting the continued growth of the state economy, which has been, as I'll get to later, has been very, very strong. And it's not just unemployment rate, but in terms of just the business taxes that are collected, the number of job openings, as you can see, the profit, the success of the businesses, many of them in the tech industry. So it's still very concerning that if you can look at the 35 to 39 and 25 to 29, the number of people quitting their jobs, that's a very major concern. And we don't know where those people are. We don't know where they went, but that's the people you want in your workforce when you have an older demographic, which New Hampshire does. New Hampshire has is the second oldest state by median age, right behind Maine and right ahead of Vermont, although those three kind of switch it, for the honor, but it's still, it's well over 40 years old, and it's not the healthiest number to have when you're looking at an economy in a state that wants to grow. One of the things I wanted to talk about in terms of this declining labor force in the COVID is that there have been many causes, but from my perspective, one of the key ones is the complete decimation of the childcare industry in New Hampshire. That left out so many people from the labor force, because as we can see by numbers, is that more women have left the New Hampshire labor force, and actually the US labor force, during COVID. And many of them have not come back yet, because in New Hampshire, there's fewer and fewer childcare providers. As you can see, in 2019, the second quarter, which was just when COVID was getting its grips on us, there were 477 childcare providers in New Hampshire. By the second quarter of 2021, 2 years later, there were 417. And that number has not budged very much in the intervening year. We have seen efforts by the state to try to provide bonus payments from the state government to people who work in the childcare industry. That brings a few people back. But in many cases, the problem is it's a historically low-paying industry. It's an industry that's populated by whose workforce is largely women, and it's women who need childcare themselves to work on the job. So it's a vicious circle. It's been a very difficult problem to address, because New Hampshire doesn't really have the ability for the state to provide any kind of, statewide childcare program. We don't have pre-K in most New Hampshire schools. Like I know, like in cities like New York, your kids go to school when they're 3. That doesn't happen in New Hampshire. We barely have kindergarten in some communities, even in this day and age, believe it, even though it's 2022. And that's really what's preventing a lot of people from rejoining the workforce. The next thing I want to talk about was housing. And housing is a very, it's probably the most concerning issue in terms of the current labor force and the future labor force. New Hampshire has had, for the last several years, even before COVID, we had a very serious housing shortage. We had an affordable housing shortage, I should say. Affordability is determined by income, sort of 8% of the average median income in an area, but I don't want to get into those kind of numbers. But let's just put it this way, that a house in New Hampshire, a single family home in New Hampshire is now, median price for the whole state is over $400,000. That is not affordable to most people by any stretch of the imagination. And in a place like Rockingham County, which is where Exeter and I believe Durham is, that's the median is closer to $700,000. So if you're a young family starting out, if you're a single person looking for a job, you're not going to be able to afford, in 99.9% of the cases, you're not going to be able to afford to live in an area where you can't buy a house for, you can't afford to. I mean, a down payment alone is, $40,000, and in some cases now $80,000. You can put down 20% to get a mortgage in some cases. I think that it's probably, as interest rates rise, it's probably going to ease up a little bit. But if you think about it, this is one of the problems, is that there has been a almost evaporation of available inventory of single family homes in New Hampshire. Right now, I saw that in Rockingham County alone, there were maybe 50 houses, less than 100 houses that were available, which was basically less than a month's worth of inventory for, they basically, if in 1 month you could sell the entire inventory if you could, basically, which is, and then nothing else coming online, if nothing else came online. And this has been a problem for many years now. And as I said, even before COVID, but it's just been exacerbated in COVID. And, but the real other concern is not just single family housing. It's also the lack of multifamily housing, of affordable apartments. Now I'm going to have to give full disclosure. I'm on the board of Catch, Neighborhood Housing, which is an organization based in Concord that builds affordable housing. But that's also why I understand this issue as deeply as I do. We have right now there's a vacancy rate for rental housing of 0.6%. That means if you take all the available multifamily housing units, only 0.6% are available to rent right now. In a healthy market, it would be more like 3, 4, or 5%. And we're not anywhere near that. The problem is that there's very little affordable housing that is not age restricted being built in New Hampshire. Much of that is because communities around the state, with the state famous for its local control, they have very serious, very severe housing restrictions, land use restrictions, zoning restrictions. Like, for instance, they require that houses be put on a minimum lot acreage, sometimes even 2 acres for one home. They also basically, by doing this, they also put height restrictions on houses. So you can't build something that might be more affordable. If you could build a 4-decker instead of, a two-floor house, you put a four-decker house, like, the old houses we used to have in the old days all over the place. Just going to Boston or, any city, and actually all over New Hampshire. They used to be fine. They used to be able to be built, but many communities have put limits on that. So you can't build houses that, as a developer, that would be affordable to develop. if you can't get more density into it. This is something that actually, on my publication, the Hampshire Business Review, we're looking at very closely, along with the Granite State News Collaborative, of how zoning has affected not just the ability to get a house, but also in many cities like Manchester and Nashua and others, just has really affected the people who are forced to live in substandard housing because that's the only stuff that's available for them. It's tied to the homelessness population. It's tied to poverty. It's tied to health issues. It's tied to poor education, crime. It's a very serious problem. But let's talk about some of the more rural areas and more, the wealthier communities in the state are the ones that mostly impose these restrictions. There's been studies that say people do that because they want to ensure the value of their home, which is quite possible. But what they're doing is basically shutting out young people from moving into their community. And by extension, they're shutting out people from living in New Hampshire if there's no place to live. So what we do is we basically are, I'm not going to say force out, but we are basically giving a very good incentive for young people to look someplace else, another state to live, where housing might be more affordable, might be more welcoming, and that affects the New Hampshire workforce. And as you can see, as older people who, in COVID, through, it's very understandable. They said, I've had enough. I just don't want to go back and work. I just don't feel safe, or I just don't need to do it anymore. As they leave the workforce, there's no one to replace them, especially in areas like the construction trades, very, very old. I mean, I believe that the average age of a tradesman, just the average tradesman, a mason or a plumber or electrician, is over 50 in New Hampshire. That's not, that's pretty close to retirement age and for many people, especially for hard work like that. So it's hard to replace those people. The same is true in healthcare. There's been a lot of people who have been leaving that industry, and to find people to replace them, New Hampshire, which is a state that's not known for exactly intervening, but as I said, with childcare and also with healthcare, they're trying their best to provide bonuses, to provide different kind of programs to entice people to enter healthcare industry, or people who are already in healthcare to maybe move up the ladder a little bit more and try to find another kind of job in healthcare. But my bottom line is, I know we're looking at this one slide for a long time. It's the housing issue is tied to so much of what ails the New Hampshire economy, and is what's strong about the New Hampshire economy, because housing is still being built in New Hampshire, but it's being built at higher prices for the most part. Affordable housing is very difficult to build, as I said. There's been some legislation actually that did actually it's going to the House floor in probably a week or so, that would basically would basically mandate the construction of double-decker, triple-decker, and four-decker units on a lot where you could build let's say a town has a 2 acres minimum, you can build up to 4 deckers, 4 floors on that lot, as long as it's connected to sewer and water, municipal sewer and water. If it's on a septic, that's not going to happen. But it's an attempt by the state to try to bring back that kind of what they call missing middle housing. We're not talking about huge apartment buildings, with 30 floors or anything. These are just housing that would be built in, if you look downtown in many areas, there are these double, triple, and quads that are populate the area, but they've been since banned because of the density rules. So that's going to be a big that's a bill that I know that at the Business Review we've been watching very closely, and it did pass through committee with a pretty nice majority, and it's going to the House floor, and then it moves on to the Senate, where the Senate Majority Leader is one of the sponsors of the bill. So there's a good possibility that bill might make its way through. Okay, now let's look at some of the other. What the other thing I'm going to talk about is how New Hampshire's attracting people into the state. After I'm telling you how they're kicking people out, well, they're also attracting people. And as you can see from this chart, New Hampshire has been, and also as well as the rest of Northern New England, have been very attractive to people in COVID. They've moved here. uh, seeking less density, rural area. They find that, there's people have been moving into the state from outside, mostly from Massachusetts, but from other states as well, New York and other states in the Northeast, coming up to New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. But New Hampshire, as I said, was been very attractive. The interesting thing is that this has also helped fuel the skyrocketing costs and the lack of inventory in the houses, because in housing, because so much of that single family housing was snapped up by people who came from away, as we say in New Hampshire. And many of them were able to sell their houses, let's say in Massachusetts or other places with very high prices of houses. And they came in and bought houses, and still are buying houses for cash. And that was very difficult for, let's say a young person to compete with. But also it just snapped up inventory, really, like almost like a vacuum cleaner over that period of the pandemic. But it also meant that New Hampshire's population has grown in this time. We've had a gain in migration from other states, and it's expected to continue going forward at foreseeable future, because of the desire by a lot of people not to live in cities. Although I think there's signs that might be easing as people get less concerned about COVID, and they might return to cities again, but they are now here. And I think a lot of people who come to New Hampshire and other states like it are looking for that kind of place anyway. And as we've learned by the change in the workplace in terms of remote work and hybrid work, that is very much more possible to do nowadays. So you can live in a place like New Hampshire and still have your job in New York or Boston or whatever. So that's something that's really something that has been a very important issue, a very important statistic in terms of New Hampshire helping New Hampshire's economy grow during this pandemic. And as you can see going back, net migration into the state is nothing new. And as you can see in the early 20th century, and actually if it went back to the 90s, that was a major spark in the growth of New Hampshire's economy in the 90s and early 2000s, was this in-migration. I know at one point New Hampshire was the fastest growing state on the East Coast, north of Florida, and that was it was in the 90s, but that was really something that was a very attractive place for people to live because of the low cost of housing and the tax situation. So as the housing increases, it's not as attractive to people, as you can see by the numbers, but it's still attractive and more attractive than many other states to live in. Now, the other thing is that these people, I'm not saying it's not the people moving here who do it, but they might be, but they're also, in COVID, we've seen a major increase in new business formations. And that's really says a lot. I think it's also tied to what they call the Great Resignation. I think people are kind of looking for something else to do. And I think they said, I'm going to work for myself. I'm tired of, working for someone else. I want to have a different kind of lifestyle. And there's been a lot of business formations. And one of the things about it is that this chart here shows propensity to hire, high propensity to hire business formations, which means these are businesses that start off with employees or are in industries that will provide jobs. So this is going forward. This is a very positive sign for New Hampshire's economy. All the previous things I talked about at the beginning notwithstanding, but it's still a very, very strong thing that people need to really think about as we move forward in New Hampshire, that there's a strong economic base. The fundamentals of New Hampshire's economy are really strong for the most part. And there's really, except for those issues that we talked about at the beginning, and I'll talk about at the end, inflation, supply chains, and housing, this is really a very positive era for the New Hampshire economy. Now which leads us to this slide, which is very interesting. Uh, it looks like the state is on track to recover all the jobs it lost in the pandemic by the end of the year. And it'll be one of the states, probably one of the states to get there earliest compared to all the other states in the country because of this basic strength, inherent strength of the economy in New Hampshire. As you can see here, New Hampshire is it's close. It's not as close as Washington and other states, but it's still in a very top tier there, as opposed to the other states in New England, and certainly the states like New York. Well, Hawaii is so dependent on tourism that's an aberration. But it could happen by the end of the year. It's expected to happen by the end of the year, barring the unforeseen circumstances, which we're unfortunately seeing at this point. But it's really something that says a lot about, as I said, about the strength of the economy. And actually, that's true about the whole country, is that it's expected that non-farm jobs should grow and be recovered by the end of the year from almost all states. And that's a really good sign. Although when you hear the inflation report today, and we know what's going on in Ukraine, we know about supply chain, it's just phenomenal to me how strong New Hampshire's economy and the US economy have been, despite all these hurdles we're facing. And it's really a strong sign. I think that the economy of both New Hampshire and the US seem to be on track going forward for the rest of the year. I don't know what 2023 has to bring us, but I would think that if we can make it through 2022, we'll probably be all right in 23. But I've said that before, so I don't want to, I just don't want to do that. I don't want to go forward on think about that. Now, one of the things I just want to talk about is I told you about this the COVID situation and what happened, the depths in 2020, and as we've gotten out of it. The other thing that we have to be concerned about is that we have had bumps in the road along the way, and that's when the variants emerge. I am not an epidemiologist or anything like that. I have no idea, but I would really think that it's not necessarily not going to happen again. So we need to be prepared for that. It's really what we've seen over the last 3 years. We've been through this. I know in 2019, I gave a presentation about the economy at the very beginning of March, right before the shutdown of the economy. And I said, we don't know what COVID does. And then in 2020, I said, well, it looks like we might be getting out and might be easing this, but we don't know what COVID does. And we had Delta. And then, we had we had another surge. And then in 2021, I gave a presentation in March, and that also was talking about the health of the economy, which is doing pretty well then by 21. And of course, we had the Delta variant, even though we had the immunizations, which unfortunately many Americans still have not taken, which I think is fueling, unfortunately, our vulnerability to these variants. So you can't make a firm prediction in 2022, March 2022, about what is expected by the end of the year in terms of COVID. But let us assume that with in many places where there's a pretty high vaccination rate, things should not be as difficult to navigate in 2022 when things kind of maybe we have another variant again. Okay, so I just want to go over some of these things again. New Hampshire's economy, U.S. economy, this is very true of the U.S. economy. Well, there's a higher number of job openings than pre-pandemic. As we know, there's been a labor shortage, and the percentage of jobs that are open compared to the U.S. in New Hampshire is higher. So this has been a concern for a long time. We're looking, the state is hoping that we can make a dent in it. Because it's always a good thing when you have create jobs, but it's not a good thing when you can't fill them. Anybody who's been to a restaurant knows that a lot of restaurants can't open all week because the way they used to. They can't open for, I know there are restaurants here. I live in Manchester that we used to go to before COVID that would have lunch and be open 7 days a week. But now they don't serve lunch, and now they're not open 7 days a week. It's very unusual for a restaurant not to be closed at least 1 day a week now, even 2 days a week, because it's not because they don't want to be open, it's because they don't have the staff. That is also true. There's in a business such as involving in manufacturing, which is perhaps the most important industry we have in New Hampshire, the tech and manufacturing industries. They also have serious labor shortages. And I do know I've talked to many CEOs of manufacturing companies, including many of the largest ones, where some of them have vacancy rates for engineers and other high-skilled employees. And at one point, I know BAE Systems, which is the largest manufacturing employer in the States, an aerospace and military contractor, they had hundreds of openings for engineers. This was even before the pandemic, and I haven't found out what it is now, but I know that they're constantly looking for jobs for people. You can see the billboards, and they're always looking, holding late fairs. They go into these high schools now to try to convince kids to consider a career in manufacturing. So this is something that is a major concern, as I said, and we're going to keep an eye on it. And the same thing with the higher quit rates, people just leaving the workforce. It's not. It might be easing now, but no one knows. We'll see the numbers. So we also have seen that because of the we saw the job growth growing, accelerating in the second half of 2021. It's continuing into 2022. This is something that is really a really good thing for New Hampshire. And I believe that's also true in the U.S. If you look at the unemployment numbers that come out every month, similar things are happening. I mean, the U.S. unemployment rate is 3.8%, which we haven't seen in decades. That's a very, very strong unemployment rate nationally. I think people who are old enough to remember the days I believe it was in the 70s, where they had the Humphrey Hawkins bill. Hubert Humphrey sponsored it, and they wanted to guarantee a unemployment rate of 4%. This was, during the recession and in the 70s, a 4% unemployment rate was considered, the gold standard. And now we have 3.8% just because of it. And that's because a lot of people have removed themselves from the workforce. But we should see return to pre-pandemic employment levels before the end of the year, which is very, very, I have faith in that, despite the labor force remaining below pandemic levels. And we talked about the state's migration trends that are helping to ease the demographic challenges that New Hampshire has seen. But we talked about the workforce, housing, COVID. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the three linked issues of Ukraine, supply chain, and inflation. Inflation today was about 7.8, 7.9% over last year. That's anyone who lived in the 1970s and early 80s knows that that's a very it's a familiar number. And I do remember actually when my wife and I bought a house in the early 80s, 1983, we got a special loan for first-time home buyers, and the rate was 11% for a balloon, not a balloon loan, but a loan, adjustable mortgage. Started at 11%, and people saying, "How'd you get a rate that low?" Because interest rates at that point for mortgages were 15 or 16%. So this would not be helpful to the growth of any economy, and it's a concern going forward, especially in terms of because of Ukraine, as I said, because of food supplies, because of energy supplies, because of the markets, the energy markets, very sensitive to this kind of stuff. We could see the price of the barrel of oil just seeming to go up every day. And as we know, this has also affected the supply chain, which also affects inflation. So I am not equipped in any way to give you a prediction of where inflation is headed or what kind of numbers we should see. But I do know that 3 months ago, I thought that inflation would be just a blip, that we'd be done by the middle of the year, and that is obviously not going to happen. I'm hoping that we can weather this pretty easily, and that it is, maybe we can handle it, maybe that it'll be something we can be dealing with. We can look back in the rearview mirror next year at some point, but not right now. It's something we have to face and deal with right now. Anyway, I'm ready to take any questions, or if anybody wants to. I think I've talked my monologue long enough. So are there any other questions out there that
well, thank
please.
you, Jeff. That was terrific. That was very thorough, and your insight is very valuable. So there are a number of questions. I'm going to read a few off to you. I'll start with the ones, there were a few specific around Riverwoods, but let me give you questions for you. Couldn't the employment challenge be improved by allowing more legal immigrants to work?
Yes, that's something that is it's almost a non, it's not something that should be ignored. It's definitely should be an important part of New Hampshire's policy, is be welcoming immigrants into the state, because first of all, many of them are actually, I would say the large majority of them have skills that we could use, that these people are, maybe they don't speak the language we do, or difficult with our language, but on the other hand, they have skills in industries that we need to get people into jobs. This is something that I know that we've written about in our paper about being a welcoming community. There are some welcoming communities in New Hampshire. I know that I interviewed the mayor of Nashville, Tennessee, at one point. This is years ago, and Nashville has become a boom town. And one of their great strategies was to say, we are a welcoming community. We welcome people from all over the world to live here. And after that, they were able to really grow to a point. It's, they're beyond just the country music industry now. It's a major city of the South. And that's because the mayor said to me that it's basically because we became a welcome community and welcomed people into their city. And the other thing I wanted to say in terms of New Hampshire's demographics, people who come from other other countries are younger. So by inviting people from other countries into your state, we will automatically have younger people living in the state. But we have to have housing, and we have to have communities that are welcoming to people who are not New Hampshire people, because New Hampshire's pretty notorious on that. But I think that the benefits far outweigh any kind of concerns that some people might have.
Good, thank you. The next question is, would greater control of Airbnbs, even banning them, improve the housing situation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because actually I have a reporter working on that story right now, and we're hoping to have it for our next issue. There are communities that are saying, I know Conway is probably up in the Mount Washington Valley, which is a resort area. They are very concerned about the growth of Airbnbs, and they're arguing that this is preventing people. These are houses that used to be rented year round to regular folks, and now they're rented on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and it's taking that home off the market. There have been studies in other countries and in other states around the United States that link the growth of Airbnb and other short-term rentals to the the lack of housing, to a shortage in housing. And that's not, there's been no study in New Hampshire on this, but we're working on trying to figure out what that is actually at the Business Review. Okay,
great. The next is, how many people work in New Hampshire but live in Maine or Mass? Is there an influx of workers coming into New Hampshire from out of the state? And does that help New Hampshire?
Yes, New Hampshire has there is people from other states come into New Hampshire to work, but for the most part, New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire in particular, which is the most populated part of the state, that is an outflow into Massachusetts for the most part. You just have to go on Interstate 93 or Interstate 95 during rush hour, and you'll see the people leaving the state. That's, at last I know, was 100,000 or so. There have been, it's not as bad as it was. These people are still working for Massachusetts companies, but they're staying in the state because they have the ability to work remotely, which is why traffic is not quite as bad as it has been. But there are a lot of companies that are itching to get their employees back to work, at least half part-time in the office. So you can tell by the traffic whether things are back to quote unquote normal.
That's true. That's true. Are low salary levels significant in New Hampshire as compared with Mass and perhaps other New England states?
Yes, that's a very good question, because New Hampshire does have lower salaries in Massachusetts for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is it's a basic one, is that our minimum wage is the federal wage of $7.25, hasn't been increased in something like 20 years.
Wow.
Massachusetts is about $12.50, I think. It's going up to $15. Vermont has a minimum wage that's going up to $15 at some point. Maine's got a minimum wage that's much higher than ours. New Hampshire's the outlier in this state, but there's not that many minimum wage jobs. And as you can see by just looking at when you drive by a McDonald's, they're not paying minimum wage. They're paying closer to $15. Mm-hmm. But it's still in the long run. New Hampshire companies have always actually Brian Gottlieb, who I used to be on a monthly radio show on New Hampshire Public Radio with him, and he referred to it as a New Hampshire discount. Employers think that they can pay less because people want to live in New Hampshire. And he used to say, you got to grow up. You got to realize that people want money. And I think that has become very clear during the pandemic. That I saw a study, I think it was on Axios today, that a lot of people are leaving because they want more money. That's the major reason they're leaving their jobs. And it's something that New Hampshire employers are going to have to deal with. They're dealing with it right now.
Mm-hmm. What are the demographics in migration?
That has been, this is just anecdotal. I haven't seen any real numbers, but I do believe it's people who are mostly in their 40s and 50s, that age range, with the ability to sell a house for, let's say $1 million in Massachusetts and move from New Hampshire. And they're still in the workforce. And but I think that I would argue probably that the vast majority of them are not working for New Hampshire companies. They're working out-of-state companies, or they have their own businesses. So it's not necessarily part of the work. They're not contributing to the workforce of New Hampshire. But it's also not the youngest people that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that was really interesting to see. It's the 35 to 39-year-olds that are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something you have to think about. It's just not. It's a really COVID really threw a major curveball at us, and it has created so many problems. And because COVID is directly related to the inflation and supply chain issues, obviously, that's what started the whole thing. So it's been difficult kind of working our way back from that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. How has the inward migration impact school enrollment, and how are the communities addressing this?
The school enrollments in New Hampshire in many communities are going down because of our aging population. There have been isolated areas where people have kids who are going into schools, but it has not greatly had a big impact on the student populations in almost every community. It's because because we don't have as many younger families and young people, children. Almost all of the school districts in the state have fewer students than they had maybe 10 years ago. It's not necessarily true in a place like Manchester or Nashua, which are cities that welcome immigrants and refugees from other countries. So they have a growing school population for the most part. But in many cities and towns, they're shutting schools or talking about shutting schools. Actually, the city of Berlin up north, which was, which was a very, very strong, healthy community 40 years ago when they had the paper mills.
Mhm.
The paper mills shut many years ago, and they have just hemorrhaging people up in the North Country, and they actually had to close their only elementary school a year or two ago. They had to put it into the middle school, which is not exactly, as a parent, well, I'm a grandfather, but as a parent, I would not have been happy to have my little one going into a school with middle school students. But that's
Right.
That's an aside.
Okay. And again, I'm sticking with questions specifically for Jeff, and then I'll address Riverwood specific questions after. But the next one, isn't it correct to say that an easing of inflation does not mean that prices will go down? Rather, they simply not increase as fast. I suspect a lot of folks are expecting prices to go down if and when inflation eases.
I agree with that. I mean, I think we should all, I mean, there's a possibility, we'll see. I would think we would see energy prices going down. But for the most part, I don't think we'll see prices go down after these things reach. But the hope is that wages can somehow keep pace with inflation, so they won't be as painful as they could be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Malcolm, thank you for your question. He said, how about welcoming Ukrainians?
That's a really good suggestion. And I think that that's something that many states are talking about. And I think New Hampshire would be smart to do that. I think it's, what is it, over 2 million refugees now from that state, that country. And it's just heartbreaking. And I think that would be that's a really great idea. And I think we should be welcoming people from other countries as well who have with our refugee issues.
Yes. So there is a group of residents at Riverwoods, Durham, that have welcomed a family from Afghanistan, and they've set them up with housing here. And
that's great.
It's been wonderful. Okay. So what taxes in New Hampshire offset the lack of income tax?
The biggest revenue raisers in New Hampshire are business taxes, which is why our publication covers what's going on in Concord very closely. The business profits tax and the business enterprise tax. The business profits tax is essentially an income tax on businesses, taxing their profits. The business enterprise tax is a tax that was created in the 90s to kind of capture taxes from smaller businesses that were basically, just paying their owner, all the profits. So you couldn't tax it because it was their income. But there's a business enterprise tax, taxes payroll, and other factors. And those are by far the biggest revenue raisers, along with the rooms and meals tax, which is something we all pay when we go out to a restaurant or we stay at a hotel in New Hampshire. That's that I think they lowered that 1% to help the tourism industry, but it's still about 8% or so now, and maybe 8.5%. And it's pretty high compared to other states, but I've been in New Hampshire since 1981, and that is something that I've noticed, is that New Hampshire people like to tax other people and not pay their own. They don't want to be taxed, but they'll tax other people very easily, very, very happily. So the thought is that the rooms and meal tax affects tourists. Well, not necessarily. I mean, anyone who's gone out to dinner knows that they're paying it. So,
right.
And also another big revenue raiser, to be fair, is the liquor commission, which it's not up there with the other three, but it's a big revenue raiser. Real estate
right on the
tax,
state borders, right?
Yes, and the real estate transfer tax has also been a very strong revenue raiser, especially with all the activity in housing sales. But that fluctuates from goes with the market.
What about the quality of schools for attracting younger families?
That's very good. I mean, I think that's a very good question. I think that a lot of communities think that having children in their communities means that they have to pay more money for their schools. So a lot of them do shortchange the school systems. The most successful communities in the state are the ones that have the best school systems. They're the ones with the strongest housing markets and all that other stuff. But it's really it's an issue that is been a conundrum for many years because New Hampshire schools are not funded at an adequate level by the state. It's been court cases over this, and it's really still not addressed at a sufficient level to really help improve the quality of schools. And I think if the higher quality schools we have, the more young families will be settling in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And Susan asks, what percentage of graduates of the UNH system and other New Hampshire colleges are choosing to remain in New Hampshire after graduation? What is being done to increase our retention of in-state college grads?
That's a really good question, Susan. And I will say this, that I don't know the exact number, but I do know that the state started an initiative to retain 55% of New Hampshire college graduates in the state. So that means the number is much lower than 55%, or it might be a little better now, but it's not going to even be 50%. And I'm speaking as a father of two children, one adult children, one lives in New Jersey, the other one lives in Seattle, which is where I am now. They like to visit, come home and visit, but they both lived in New York for a long time. My daughter still works in New York City, but that's another housing market that's got problems. So they had to go buy a house in New Jersey, but that's another matter. Mm-hmm. But it's something that New Hampshire New Hampshire industries are very aware of, and I think there have been attempts at the state level and also by the colleges and employers to kind of retain young, college graduates in New Hampshire, especially because they're in demand so much, and especially in the tech industry, to provide, let's say, help pay off their college loans for the first, if they stay on the job for a couple of years, or if they say they'll stay for 5 years, that's seems like a pretty effective enticement, but it doesn't entice everybody. The other thing is the state is also coming up with a similar thing for people in specific industries like tech and healthcare, that if they stay in the state, they will have part of their college loans paid for. So that seems to be the other thing is I think a lot of young people who are college age go out of state because I'm not saying anything that's not true. It's like New Hampshire is one of the highest cost University of New Hampshire University systems, one of the highest cost public colleges in the country, and I think that kind of tells young people, well, go someplace else to go to school, and when they leave the state to go to school, a lot of them don't come back.
They stay, yeah. Did your children go to school out of state?
Yes, they did. One went to Smith, and the other one went to Barton, New York, and mm-hmm. And they gravitated down to the city, which is where I'm from, as if you couldn't tell. I'm from Brooklyn. So they they're very aware of New York, but they both really like living there. But then, Ben, our son, decided he wanted to live out in Seattle, which is a really nice city too. So, but mm-hmm. the thought of moving to New Hampshire is not high on their agenda, and I think that's unfortunately true for a lot of young people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Susan asked, no income tax, but how does real estate tax rate compare to other New England states?
You mean the property tax or the real estate transfer tax? If you're talking about the property taxes, they're much higher than the other states, because that is, when I gave the answer before about the great revenue raises in New Hampshire, by far the biggest revenue raiser is a local property tax. Mm-hmm. Most businesses pay more in property taxes than they do in business profits tax, actually. Not most, but a lot of businesses do. The property taxes in New Hampshire are much higher because we don't have an income tax, we don't have a broad-based tax, and so when so much of the schools and other services are provided at the local level with very little help from the state, so that it's always the property tax that's relied on, and that's one of the problems with having improving the quality of our schools is it's tied so much to the property tax because it's the local property tax that pays for the schools.
Mm-hmm. And Wayne says, are there discussions of New Hampshire having an income tax?
There have been, yeah, there have been people who've run for governor and other offices trying to have an income tax, but I just don't. I used to think that it was going to happen at some point, but I've seen some very good, strong income tax proposals that never made it. And been around long enough to not predict anything to do with an income tax in New Hampshire. People they just don't seem to want it. Although, you know, you meet people who want it, but for some reason, it's not happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm going to jump in for a few of these Riverwood specific questions. But Jeff, can I ask you to go to the next slide?
Certainly.
And I just want to show everyone invite everyone to our next online workshop. The title is New England Real Estate Trends for 2022. And that's going to be held Wednesday, April 20th at 1 p.m. This is with Bill Weidecker from Russell. He is wonderful. He's with Keller Williams. We've had him on quite a few times, and he really does a great job letting us know about real estate trends. If you see down on the chat there, you can see a link to register for that. We also have a QR code, which is right here on the screen. You can actually take your cell phone and take the camera from your cell phone, put it up to the QR code, and then click the link on your phone, and you'll be able to register right there. So let's go back to questions. All right, so the first question here is, what percentage of entrance and monthly service fees are tax deductible? It is different for each of the 3 communities. What we do is we bring in an auditor, and that person will look at the occupancy of healthcare and look at the occupancy on the independent side and arrive at a number, and our finance team sends out a letter each January for the residents to share with their accountants and tax advisors. So if you did have a specific question on the community, a specific campus of Riverwoods, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can answer what the percentage has been in this current year. And Susan, thank you for the question. Could Riverwoods open a daycare center with participation from the residents? Justine Vogel, our CEO, she did just address this at a meeting last week because this has been a consideration. You know, they work all the time. Getting staff is, as you can imagine, foremost on their mind. It is a priority. And she said they really looked at building a daycare center, looked at the viability of it, but they've done a number of questionnaires to all staff among the 3 communities. And she said it really just didn't warrant enough demand there with our staff to do that. And then there's a question on offering housing to staff. I'm not sure if that's something that they are considering as well, but there's a number of questions of what Riverwoods has done to really reconcile and to bring in staff. So a few things we've done, we've definitely increased wages, and that has helped. We have offered, so our shortage has been with healthcare workers, as you can imagine. We've done an amazing job bringing in new healthcare workers, but where we are right now, we still in the communities, we still have openings for a few LNAs and CNAs. So a number of things that are being done is working with local colleges, working with New Hampshire high schools as well, and paying tuition for the staff members to receive the education, to be a CNA, to be an LNA. So there are a lot of creative things going on regarding staffing there. Also flexibility, allowing flexibility with our healthcare staff, that has been a big, big positive there. Let me see, okay. How did the workforce shortage and housing shortage impact employee headcount? Yeah, so we just discussed that. And Jeff, one more for you. How do you reconcile new business growth with lack of workers?
I think that that's pretty much tied, because I think a lot of those workers are the people who are starting their new businesses. But I assume they're confident that they'll be able to hire people. But that's a major concern, because you'll be finding businesses are poaching employees from other places, because there's not as many new employees coming into the workforce. Mm-hmm. So it's not the healthiest situation in terms of long-term growth, because we need to have more people in the workforce to fill these jobs. You know, I think it's great to have a 2.6% unemployment rate, but not when 22,000 people are not in the workforce anymore, or just voluntarily left the workforce. So that's something that going forward, you have to really address. That's why that idea of welcoming immigrants, welcoming people from other countries is a really very good idea.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Sally's saying there is a dividend and interest tax.
Yes, there is. Yes, which is being phased out, by the way.
It is.
They voted to phase it out, and they put something in the budget last year, and it's going to go down to zero over a period, I think 5 years. It's going to not exist anymore.
Okay. All right. And Kay says she is interested in the concept of adding a daycare center. Okay. To CCRCs for many reasons, including socialization with more than just the elderly. Great. All right. And Charles, is it your understanding that the effective tax rate for New Hampshire only differs by a few percentage points compared to Massachusetts?
The effective tax rate in which tax?
Yeah, he doesn't state.
The property tax. Oh, you mean in terms of the overall tax rate? Yeah. The thing about the property tax, if I'm answering the question correctly, the thing about the property tax is that it depends on what community you live in. If you live in a community that they say is property rich, like you live in a community with lakes and other things that to attract people to live there, especially people with communities with second homes, your property tax is going to be lower. But if you live in a community that's property poor, where there's not many businesses, and it's mostly just taxing houses and other property like that, the property rate's gonna be very high, much higher than it is in other states. Okay. So it's really if it's the property tax that the question's about.
Okay. All right. We have quite a few more, and I know it's 10 past 2 right now. Let's see. Let's do a few more, and then the ones we have your names, we can send specific answers back to you if we don't have questions to answer all of them. All right, and Jeff, maybe you can weigh in on this. How do these economic issues affect Riverwood's short-term and long-term?
I think the economic issues affecting Riverwoods, I think Therese mentioned this, that Justine was talking about the workforce issues, having to raise salaries to get to attract people. That I think Riverwoods I know is a very strong business for organization. That it's they're obviously able to adapt to the need for higher wages to attract employees, because that's, I think, is the major concern going forward for an organization like Riverwoods to attract people who are in that industry. I think that that's important. And also, I think it looks up for them because as our state remains old, I mean, that's, they're going to be going to places like Riverwoods. So, they'll be looking for places like Riverwoods to live. So that's a positive.
Right. And our CEO, Justine Vogel, just came back from a conference in Miami with 25 other CEOs of other CCRCs around the country, and they all shared that labor staffing is their top priority.
Yeah.
The top thing that they will continue to focus on and make a priority.
Yeah.
All right. So I know it is quite a bit past. What I'm going to do now is I see a lot of names on these few remaining questions. So I will reach out directly to the remaining questions here. But I want to thank you, Jeff, very much. This was very informative, very helpful. And I'd like you to just click to the next slide, Jeff, if you could.
Gotcha.
Okay, great.
Well, that can help.
Okay, there it is. All right.
Okay.
So please, thank you all for joining us today. And we would love to hear directly from you. You can reach each of the 3 communities with the email address there. And we would love to hear from you, love to be able to provide more information on all 3 communities and provide a tour if you'd like as well. So Jeff, thank you very much. This was
Thanks
terrific.
for inviting me. I really had a great time. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, take care. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.